Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe now to receive more captivating stories every day. Richard Clean epitomized ambition. Early on, he was known for his relentless drive, laser-sharp focus, and a cutthroat determination to ascend the corporate ladder. To many, he was the embodiment of success, a man who had it all. But for Richard, that was never enough. He craved more power, more wealth, and more prestige. He envisioned himself as a future titan and was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to reach the top. But there was one thing standing in his way: his family, or at least, that's how he saw it. His wife, Emily, was everything Richard wasn't. While he chased power and status, she found meaning in simplicity and the bonds of family. Emily had always been Richard's grounding force, urging him to slow down, savor moments with their 2 children, and appreciate life outside of the corporate grind. But Richard couldn't see it that way. To him, Emily represented a distraction, a life weighed down by limitations, full of responsibilities that held him back. One evening, after a grueling day at work and an even longer meeting with potential investors, Richard came home to find Emily waiting for him. She had spent hours preparing a family dinner, hoping to reignite the warmth they once shared, but Richard barely acknowledged her. His mind was already on the next deal, the next meeting. He saw her efforts as quaint, even laughable. Why waste time on sentiment when greatness was within his reach? Their arguments had become routine. Their voices clashed like waves against rocks. Emily would beg him to find balance, to remember the life they'd built together, but Richard was unshaken. He couldn't, no, he wouldn't, be tied to a life he deemed beneath him. That night, as their voices echoed through the house, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He looked at Emily, his face hard and resolute, and announced he was leaving. He wasn't just walking out of the house or the argument, he was leaving her, their children, the life they had built together. And he felt no regret. Emily's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she processed his words. She tried to stop him, to reason with him, but Richard was already gone. In his mind, he was focused on the prize. A future where he was the CEO of a major corporation, unburdened by the family he believed was holding him back. Without so much as a glance back, Richard walked out and into a new life. A life he believed was finally worthy of him. The years that followed were everything Richard had dreamed of. He quickly climbed the corporate ladder, his ambition unfettered by familial obligations. Deals were made, profits soared, and he became one of the most ruthless businessmen in the industry. He had everything he wanted, a life defined by success, luxury, and power. Meanwhile, Emily was left to pick up the pieces. With 2 children to care for and no financial support from Richard, she was forced to find a way to survive. The betrayal cut deep, leaving her to question everything she had believed about love, loyalty, and partnership. She felt discarded, as though she and her children had been mere stepping stones for Richard's ambition. For months, Emily navigated the chaos of single motherhood while struggling to keep a roof over their heads. But Emily was resilient. Beneath the heartbreak, a fire began to burn, a fierce determination to rebuild her life, not out of revenge, but to prove to herself and her children that they were more than what Richard had reduced them to. Emily took a job at a small company, working her way up from an entry-level position. She absorbed every lesson, every skill, and every insight she could, determined to turn her life around. She didn't possess Richard's ruthless ambition, but she had something far more meaningful, an authentic passion for her work and a deep desire to create something impactful. Her colleagues admired her for her unwavering dedication and vision, and gradually, she started building a reputation for herself. Over time, Emily's career flourished. With each promotion, her standing within the industry grew. She never sought out recognition, but it came to her nonetheless. Under Emily's leadership, the company thrived. They expanded into new markets and innovated in ways that set them apart from the competition. Emily had discovered her true calling, and she excelled in a way she had never imagined possible. Meanwhile, Richard's life wasn't going according to plan. Despite early success, his company began to encounter a series of setbacks, shifting economic conditions, unexpected competitors, and his own reckless decisions took their toll. Richard, once hailed as the golden boy of business, found himself struggling to maintain control of his empire. Investors were becoming wary, profits were slipping, and his self-assurance was beginning to fade. He had burned countless bridges on his way up, and now, as he fought to preserve his crumbling empire, he found himself isolated, without allies or support. The cutthroat attitude that had once propelled him forward was now his greatest liability. Yet even as his world unraveled, Richard couldn't let go of his pride. He refused to admit his mistakes, convinced he could turn things around on his own. But fate had different plans. When his company teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, Richard was forced to seek investors, anyone who could save his legacy. Desperate, he sent out proposals to every major corporation he could think of, hoping someone would see the potential in his once thriving business. Weeks passed with no replies, and Richard's desperation grew. He was on the brink of losing everything he had worked for, the very thing he had sacrificed his family for. Just as he was ready to give up, a proposal came back with an offer. It was from a conglomerate he hadn't heard much about, an emerging powerhouse in the industry known for innovation and integrity. Richard felt a glimmer of hope. This was his chance to salvage his company, rebuild his empire, and prove that he was still a force to be reckoned with. But as he prepared to meet the conglomerate's CEO, Richard had no idea that fate was about to deliver one last shocking twist, one that would completely upend everything he thought he knew about success, power, and the true cost of ambition. Richard arrived at the headquarters of the conglomerate that had responded to his proposal, hopeful that they would see the value in what remained of his company. The building was sleek, modern, and imposing, exactly the kind of headquarters he had once envisioned for himself. As he stepped inside, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. This was his final chance to save his legacy. He was led to a grand conference room where he was told the CEO would meet with him shortly. Richard tapped his fingers nervously on the table, a rare sense of unease creeping in. He was used to being in control, the one people sought out for approval, but here he was, at the mercy of a stranger's decision. The door swung open, and in walked the CEO. Richard froze. His mouth fell slightly open as he took in the all-too-familiar face before him. It was Emily, his ex-wife, the woman he had walked out on without a second thought. The woman he had once seen as an anchor, holding him back, was now standing before him, poised and composed, radiating an authority that left him stunned. Emily's expression was one of professional courtesy, but a flicker of something else, perhaps satisfaction, shone in her eyes. She extended her hand to him, as if they were complete strangers meeting for the first time. For the first time, Emily said, her voice calm, "It's been a while." Richard's mind reeled. This couldn't be real. How was it possible that Emily, of all people, had become the CEO of this powerful company? The woman he had left behind had surpassed everything he had ever aimed for, and more. For the first time in his life, Richard was at a loss for words. Emily motioned for him to sit, taking a seat herself across from him at the sleek glass table. Her gaze never wavered, assessing him with a calm intensity that made Richard feel as though she was weighing his every flaw. He struggled to regain his composure, but the weight of her scrutiny was crushing his confidence. After a long, tense silence, Emily spoke. "I reviewed your proposal, Richard. Your company is in a precarious state, high debt, declining profits, and a significant loss of investor confidence." She paused, her steady gaze locking with his. "It's clear you need help." A surge of indignation rushed through Richard. How dare she speak to him like this? As if he was some washed-up entrepreneur begging for charity. But deep down, he knew there was truth in her words. He was here because he had nowhere else to turn. "Yes, we've faced some setbacks," Richard replied, his voice strained as he fought to keep it steady. "But with the right investment, I believe we can turn things around." Emily raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in her expression. "Is that so?" The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, and it gnawed at Richard's pride. He had spent years cultivating his image as a business titan, a man who controlled his destiny. Now he was at the mercy of the woman he had once dismissed as insignificant. Emily continued to review the documents in front of her with a calm precision, almost as though she was savoring the moment, enjoying the irony of how their roles had reversed. After a few minutes, she finally met his gaze again. "Richard, I need you to understand something. My interest in your company isn't personal. This is a business decision." Richard nodded stiffly, trying to suppress the growing resentment within him. He had no choice but to play along, to swallow his pride if he wanted to salvage what was left of his company. "I understand, Emily," he replied, his voice tight. "I'm open to negotiating terms that are fair." Her lips curved into a slight smile. "Oh, I think you'll find my terms very fair." She slid a document across the table, and as Richard glanced down at it, his stomach dropped. The terms were harsh. She was offering to buy a controlling stake in his company at a price far below what he had hoped for, essentially. He would be surrendering control, becoming a subordinate in the very company he had built from scratch. This is robbery," he stammered, his face flushing with anger. "You're offering me pennies for a company worth 10 times that amount." Emily tilted her head slightly, her gaze sharp. "Richard, I'm offering you exactly what the company is worth in its current state, and I'm taking on significant risk by even considering this investment." She leaned forward, her tone turning icy. "I don't owe you anything. You walked away from me and our children without a second thought, so don't think for a moment I'll do you any favors." Richard's face went pale. Her words cut deep, each one a harsh reminder of the life he had discarded so carelessly. He had expected her to be broken, perhaps even bitter, but this Emily, standing before him with power and control, was a stranger to him. Swallowing his pride, Richard fought to keep his composure. "Emily," he said, his voice barely audible, "I'm asking for your help. You don't have to do this for me, but think of the children. This company is part of their legacy too." For a split second, he thought he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes, but it vanished before he could make sense of it. "The children are fine," she replied flatly. "They've grown up without you, and they don't need your legacy. They have a mother who has built something far better than you could have imagined." Richard clenched his fists under the table, a mix of shame and resentment rising within him. He knew he was losing control, but he also knew he couldn't afford to walk away from this deal. Not if he wanted to salvage what little dignity he had left. Emily rose from her chair, signaling the meeting's end. "Take some time to think about it," she said, her voice cold and final. "If you want to move forward, have your lawyers review the contract and get back to me. Otherwise, there are plenty of other companies looking for opportunities." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Richard alone, humiliated and defeated. In the following days, Richard's mind was a storm of emotions. He couldn't shake the image of Emily, composed and powerful, looking at him with barely disguised disdain. The thought that she had succeeded where he had failed tormented him. She had built an empire while his had crumbled. He attempted to negotiate with her, hoping to soften the deal, but Emily remained unyielding. She was willing to invest, but only on her terms. If he wanted her help, he would have to accept the harsh reality of becoming her subordinate. With no other choice, Richard finally signed the contract, relinquishing control of his company to Emily. The defeat was bitter. He had once left her behind to chase power, and now he was reduced to working under her authority. On his first day back in the office, now an employee instead of the CEO, Richard felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him as he walked through the corridors of what was once his domain. He could feel the stares of his former colleagues on him, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. He had become a cautionary tale, a man whose relentless ambition had led to his own undoing. Emily's presence was everywhere. Her influence, her vision, and her leadership had transformed the company into something Richard barely recognized. She was respected, even admired, by the employees who valued her integrity and her unwavering commitment to creating a company that prioritized people just as much as profits. In every way that truly mattered, she had become the leader Richard had always dreamed of being, yet had never managed to become. As weeks passed, Richard found himself begrudgingly respecting Emily. She had achieved what he once thought was impossible. She had built an empire without sacrificing her values, without abandoning her family, and without surrendering herself to ambition. She had become the person he always wanted to be, and the painful truth settled in: where she had succeeded, he had failed. But as Richard adjusted to his new role, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's triumph was more than just a twist of fate. It was a reckoning. A stark reminder of the choices he had made, the family he had abandoned, and the legacy he had sacrificed on the altar of ambition. In the months that followed, Richard's life began to feel surreal. Each morning, he walked into the office that he once ruled, only to find himself answering to Emily. He no longer had the authority to make decisions, no longer commanded the respect of his employees, and no longer felt the exhilarating power of control that had once defined him. Instead, he found himself merely going through the motions, his pride slowly eroded by the grind of his new reality. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. Under her leadership, the company not only stabilized but began to grow, expanding into new markets and forming partnerships Richard would never have imagined. She was strategic, decisive, and above all, respected. Her employees viewed her as a visionary leader who genuinely cared about their well-being. Richard watched from the sidelines, unable to ignore the fact that she had built something remarkable, something far greater than what he had left her with. It was the first time in Richard's life that he felt true inadequacy. For years, he had believed that success was his birthright, that greatness was his destiny simply because of his ambition. But now, as he watched Emily's success unfold, he was forced to face the harsh reality: he had been wrong. His success had been built on arrogance and selfishness, and it had crumbled the moment real adversity hit. Richard's thoughts often drifted to his children, now nearly grown. He had missed their childhoods, the milestones he had once dismissed as insignificant. Emily had raised them alone, been there for every scraped knee, every school recital, every triumph and disappointment. And now, looking back, he felt a sharp pang of regret as he realized he had abandoned the only true legacy he could have left behind. One afternoon, as Richard was preparing a report for Emily, she entered his office, a modest space far from the corner office he had once occupied. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Richard," she said, her voice steady, "there's something I think you should see." She handed him a folder, and as he opened it, he was met with a series of photographs, his children, grown and smiling, each photo capturing moments he had missed. His daughter's high school graduation, his son's first day of college, family gatherings where he was notably absent. A wave of guilt washed over him as he looked at the faces of the young adults they had become, realizing just how much he had missed, how little he truly knew about them. "Emily, he started, but she raised a hand to stop him. "I didn't show you these to hurt you, Richard," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I wanted you to see what you gave up. You may not have been there, but I wanted you to know that they turned out well. They're strong, resilient, and kind. They didn't need you to become who they are." Her words stung, but Richard knew they were true. He had abandoned his family for the illusion of greatness, only to discover that true greatness was in the life he had left behind. The realization was bitter, an unbearable weight pressing down on him, a burden he could not escape. He looked at Emily, his voice barely a whisper. "I was a fool, wasn't I?" Richard asked, his voice heavy with regret. Emily met his gaze, her expression softening with a trace of empathy. "Yes, you were," she replied gently. "But that doesn't mean you can't make amends." Her words hit him like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope cutting through the darkness of his guilt. For the first time in years, Richard dared to imagine a different future, one where he could try to rebuild the relationships he had so carelessly torn apart. In the weeks that followed, Richard made a conscious effort to reconnect with his children. At first, they were wary, unsure of his intentions. But slowly, as he proved his sincerity, they began to open up. He attended his daughter's art exhibition, applauding her as she proudly showcased her work. He met his son for lunch, listening attentively as he shared his dreams and aspirations. The journey was slow, marked by moments of tension and pain, but it was a start. For the first time in his life, Richard was learning to value relationships over ambition, finding fulfillment in the simple joy of being present for the people who mattered. Through it all, Emily remained a quiet presence. She didn't interfere or offer advice, but watched from afar, observing his efforts with quiet satisfaction. She had forgiven him, not out of weakness, but because she had moved beyond the pain he had caused. She was at peace with her own success, secure in the knowledge that she had built a life of purpose and meaning. One evening, as Richard was leaving the office, he found Emily standing by the window, gazing out at the city skyline. He hesitated for a moment, then approached her. "Emily," he said softly, "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for giving me a chance to make things right." She turned to face him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't do it for you, Richard," she replied. I did it for our children. They deserved to see their father try to be a better man. Her words reminded him of the life he had left behind, the choices he had made, and the consequences he had been forced to face. But they also reminded him of the hope that remained, the possibility of redemption that was still within his reach. As he walked away from the office that night, Richard felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He knew he couldn't change the past or undo his mistakes, but he could choose to be better, to build a future that was defined not by ambition, but by love and connection. Years passed, and Richard continued to work under Emily's leadership, finding satisfaction not in power, but in purpose. He became an advocate for work-life balance within the company, championing the importance of family and relationships. His reputation gradually shifted from that of a ruthless businessman to a man who had learned the value of humility and second chances. Meanwhile, Emily, ever the visionary, continued to lead the company with grace and strength. Her success was undeniable, her reputation unshakable. But she never forgot her roots. She had built her empire not as a monument to herself, but as a legacy for her children, a testament to the resilience and strength she had found in the face of adversity. In the end, Richard's life took on new meaning, one he had never expected. He had once believed that success was defined by power and wealth, but now he understood that true success lay in the relationships he had neglected, the family he had once taken for granted. And though he could never undo the past, he found peace in the knowledge that he had been given a second chance. A chance to be the father and man he had always aspired to be. As he watched his children grow and saw the pride in Emily's eyes, Richard finally understood the true cost of ambition, the price he had paid in his pursuit of greatness. But he also understood the gift he had been given, the opportunity to rebuild, to make amends, and to find redemption in the love he had once discarded. In that realization, he found a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth or power could ever provide. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Share them with us.